Hello and welcome. Today in developmental psychology, we're going to be talking about early adulthood. And again, every time I start these lectures, I ask that question, how did we get here? And so developmental psychology is very broad. We can spend all day talking about the development of the brain and the body and the interaction between the two. And then we could talk about that at different stages in our life, beginning with when you learn to first start walking and talking, and then your brain starts growing, and then here you are at 7 or 8, you're starting to do some more complex reasoning, and then as an adolescent, you have the ability to think abstractly and think outside the box. And so, again, in psychology, we're really focused on the evolution of the structure of the brain, the neuroscience of it all, but also the evolution of behavior, emotion, cognition, motivation. And for each person, it's a little bit different. Yes, there are these universal pathways that we all share being human, but some people have different personalities. Some people are more excitable than others. Some people are more chilled and relaxed. Some people want the greatest life ever where they have to climb Mount Everest. And some people are happy just living in a small town and enjoying that social part of being in a small town and knowing everybody. And so here we are in early adulthood. We're starting to question the meaning of life. What's it all about? Am I happy with my life? What do I want to do with my life? Again, it's just so complex. And so it's often hard to, even really start to know where to begin. Like, how do we just jump into early adulthood? How did we get here? How far has our brain grown? So again, from the little cells that we started out to, our brain has been growing this entire time. And what's really happening is our conscious mind is also expanding simultaneously. So, as we've acquired knowledge and we've made sense of reality by putting the stimuli together and trying to organize it in such a way that you can function in this social world and things make sense. And as our ability to use language and interact in the social context grows, our ability to reflect grows, our ability to utilize our conscious mind, our wisdom starts to grow, our higher level executive functioning starts to grow. That's kind of where we're at in early adulthood. But then we're also hit with all the social expectations, like careers and having kids if that's your thing, or having relationships, or trying to find meaning, or whatever it is. All these things that we go through in early adulthood when we essentially are expected to be autonomous and be able to live in this world and somehow get along. You know what I mean? And so that's kind of where we're at in early adulthood. We've assumed that we've, finished our education or early education or high school. We're out in the world. We're expected to go to college and get jobs and try to figure out how to survive, and and each environment is different. So here we are in a capitalist society like America that's post-technological, and that the only way to make money is to sell your labor or to be an owner. It's not like we're going out and seeking nature, like how to go live in an Alaskan wilderness and survive. And so, again, what we seek is so dependent upon the culture and the region that we live in. The expectations are influenced by the culture that we live in. And so, even more so than just general development, you have to understand development within this larger social context. And again, that's the interaction between sociology and psychology, and that you can't understand the individual and how they develop without understanding the social context. And here in early adulthood, the book is heavily focused upon all of the things in the social context, those responsibilities that we take on, and how that affects us. It doesn't focus so much on the individual level factors, like what's really happening in your mind, like you're feeling. What are you feeling when you're 25 years old? What kind of experiences are you going through? You know, like your optimism level, right? It's like so strong at that time, and then by 40, is your optimism level start to decrease? Does your thinking change over time? What are your priorities at that time? And so again, it's way too much for me to discuss in one lecture all of these things. But again, You have to understand that interplay between biology, psychology, and sociology, and then the historical social context, and that your body is driving you, right? Your hormones are, flowing through your bloodstream, seeping into your brain. Your body is telling your mind that you want stuff, which then forces your mind to think about what is it your body wants, and you're like, okay, I need food, sex, water, shelter, fun, companionship. And so then you consciously are like, how do I achieve these things, right? How do I find companionship and find love and find romance and find money or food or shelter or water or whatever it is that you need, right? And then the social context structures your access. It's in the social context that you have to go out and find these rewards, like your food or your love or whatever it is that you seek, meaning in life, spirituality, and for everyone it's completely different. But again, that's just why it's so complex. And so again, every time I start these lectures, you're like, where do you even begin? Do we begin with the body driving us to make babies, and to create relationships and, form psychosexual, interpersonal, committed, passionate, whatever relationships? Again, it's just so complex. But again, we'll follow along with the book. And, I wish I had 10,000 lectures to go about this, but so here we are. We're going to start out with early adulthood, and then we'll kind of get into middle and late adulthood over the next couple of chapters. But we have now since left adolescence. Okay, we have moved on. When does adolescence end? Again, it's completely arbitrary. You could say adolescence goes all the way until our prefrontal cortex really develops at 25. But again, it's us who socially construct these categories like, childhood and teenager and adolescent and young adult, early adult, middle adult. We're the ones who made these categories up, right? And then we just label these with criteria. So the book has decided, and general, understandings of life have decided that maybe at 18, that's when early adulthood starts. And so again, we're kind of looking at the end of adolescence, 17, 18, 19, 20 years old, working our way into our 40s and our 50s when we start to hit that middle, and then, you start to hit 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, getting into our later adulthood. But here at this point in our life, we're really looking at what are you going through between ages 18 and like 40. And so, again, that's why my introduction is just trying to encapsulate all of these things we need to think about. Because, again, your body and your brain are still going through changes, and that will happen throughout your life. Okay, the way you think is evolving. Again, you're no longer maybe thinking through the lens of your 7-year-old self. Now you're starting to look through the lens of an 18-year-old self. And I don't like to think of myself as an adult, because then that means I have to kind of conform to the social expectations of what it means to be an adult. But I can see that there is like that point where maybe you start thinking in a way that you're like, okay, I have kind of evolved from the way I used to think. And so again, this phase is just another sense of our evolving thoughts and hearts and feelings. And like, when I was younger, I was way more emotionally out of control. And I mean, not that I'm that much better in my older self, but at least I can recognize it and be like, okay, I'm acting like an idiot. I can catch myself quicker. And so I can see where I'm changing as I work my way into middle adulthood, because here I am at 40, the cusp of early adulthood. It's all over. I have to go to middle aged. More about that next chapter, when we cry and break down and we realize where we're at. So again, the end of 18 to the end of adolescence until about 40 is what we're focusing on here. Again, we are going to talk about this stage, this 20-25 year stage, talking about this emerging adulthood into early adulthood. Okay, and I think this is kind of a new idea, but again, aren't all phases, you're always kind of emerging toward the next phase, right? So when you're a toddler, you're really starting to work out your vocabulary, your muscle memory, and things like that. Then once you hit like 6, 7, you're really starting to work on like becoming more adult like in your friendships and the way you interact with people. And then by the time you're a teenager, we let you loose with parental supervision to go interact in the world, much more autonomously. And then that's you kind of working your way or merging into, being a high schooler. And then after high school, you start to work your way into emerging adulthood, right? Like you start to take your first serious jobs, you're having to pay the rent for yourself for the first time, or you're living with your parents or something along those lines. I mean, we're going to get into a second, but half of people up until like age 30, 35 in modern times live with their parents or somebody else in their family. Only like 15% of people are living with a roommate or, and I'll get into all that in a big second. But again, there's been some huge cultural shifts. So again, when does adulthood really begin is the question. Is it when you leave the house? Is it when you're 18? Is it when you have a job for yourself and you can take care of yourself? And so these are all arbitrary conditions or criteria that we apply to being an adult. But again, that emerging adulthood is that process of starting to figure your stuff out. I don't know, that's that way a good way to say it, right? You've kind of figured out your personality, you kind of know your identity, you're not really exploring that so much in the world. Now you start to work on your competencies and start to act on your skills and delve into your passions or whatever it might be, starting to work to that point where you can just take care of yourself and be on your own. Um, so again, this idea that we start out with emerging adulthood and work our way into early adulthood, and then we're emerging into middle adulthood when we're in early adulthood, and then we're emerging into late adulthood again. Just realize that life, that's that cycle of life, right? That's that constant transition of development where we're from birth, we're starting out, and then is it like a bell curve where you hit middle age and then it's all downhill from there? I mean, again, that's just another way of looking at it. But again, our bodies are changing. We're growing cells and then our cells start to die. Our heart goes strong and then our heart starts being weaker, starts having leaks or problems. And then, so yeah, but again, the idea that it's a downhill slope is also arbitrary because why can't life just be a continuous upslope? Just because you got old, does that mean your quality of life has to go down? Like just because something happens to you and you are disabled. So like they've done some studies on people that just get, injured or something like that and they can't walk again. And those first couple of months are very rough. But if you go ask them a year later, their quality of life is back through the roof in their self-identified, self-reported perspective. So really what happens. Again, our brain's ability to adapt and change and be grateful. A lot of these things tend to happen. So again, although these age periods differ in their physical, cognitive, and social development, overall this period from 18 to 14 is that time of peak physical capability. So says the book. So darn you, book, trying to say that my peak capabilities are going to end now that I'm 40. Blah. It is also this phase where we're becoming more mature in our cognitive development, financial independence, establishment of intimate relationships. Again, just what do you see in the world? What are these people that are getting out of high school and trying to go out on their own experiencing? And then comes love, and then comes marriage, and then comes the family, and then, or none of that. The heck with that. Who needs kids, right? And so again, you have this back and forth between cultural norms and those social expectations and what each individual wants and what's the right thing we're supposed to do and what's the actual meaning of life. Nobody has an answer to this. Again, it's all subjective, right? It's all what we think things should be. And in the end, it should just be up to you. What do you want out of your life? And that's that phase that we're at, right? You're 18, 19, 20, going on 40, and you're always asking yourself, what do I want? What makes me happy? How do I get that? And that's not necessarily, I mean, we could just talk about that for days. So again, that's why I keep saying there's so much here in developmental psychology. I would just rant for hours if I didn't stay on task. Um, so, but there's just, it's very fascinating stuff, right? I mean, who doesn't want to explore humans seeking out a sense of our self-understanding and making sense of reality, right? Like, I love walking into a class at 7:30 in the morning and talking about the nature of reality. They just love that, you know? That's the beauty and the philosophy of life. But again, how much of psychology is this looking at the philosophy of life and asking, are we achieving our goals and our outcomes, right? Are we living life to our fullest? Are we becoming self-actualized, right? And how do you become self-actualized? All of that is relative. It's up to you to decide, I need a career to be happy. Well, why can't you just go live out in the woods? What, is that not just good enough and hunt for your food and fish, I mean, so to every person, it's different. And so again, we always have to recognize the cultural biases at stake here. But again, during emerging adulthood, this period between 18 and 25, arbitrarily coded by the book and other people that can support this with research, individuals in this age period have left behind the relative dependency of their childhood and adolescence, but they haven't yet necessarily taken on all those responsibilities of adulthood, which again are culturally labeled. It's up to us to decide that's a successful adult. They got a job and a college degree. Well, what about that person who just skinned a deer and did all kinds of amazing stuff? Who really is living the better life? Who has the more knowledge? Again, I don't want to go off on days about the cultural relativeness of all of what it means to be a responsible adult, but you should be questioning that. You should be questioning what it means to be a responsible adult because there's what you've been told your whole life and what you've heard your whole life and what you yourself think. And so it's always good to ask yourself, what do I think? But again, during this phase, we're always going through our sense of identity exploration, but we do have a much more solidified sense of temperament and personality and things along those lines. Is it an age of instability? I mean, I'm probably had 30 jobs during my youth when I was in college and working my way up and starting a young family. I don't know if it was instability, but like you just have to do what you have to do to survive during that time because it's not like everyone is born at 18 with tons of capital, money in their pocket. You got to go out and survive, right? And then you might be bouncing from experience to experience and trying out all kinds of things to see what you really like. You might be trying to balance what you have to do versus what you want to do. Um, so again, is it an age of self-focus? I mean, that's again arbitrary, but we're all focused on trying to make our lives awesome. And so at this time, this is a very important time for setting ourselves up. I remember thinking when I was young, like if I'm still waiting tables at 25, I should question everything, and that was just me being kind of biased, because I was totally still waiting tables and going through college forever, but again, I had it in my head that like I wasn't going to be someone if I didn't wasn't successful by the time I was like 25. But again, that's just me internalizing the norms of society. Eventually, I had to decide for myself what is it, how do I feel about myself, right? But again, it takes a while to build your life. Like becoming a professor takes forever. You have to go to college so long and then write so many papers. And I mean, you can't like even really finish it by the time you're 25. And, so who am I to judge myself for like not being a professor by the time I was 25 or something like that? But I mean, you do that. You do judge yourself. But again, you should ask yourself how you judge yourself, measure yourself based upon your own measure. But again, we are self focused during this time because we're trying to build out our life. Do we have this feeling of in between? I don't know. I've always kind of felt I knew what I was and what I wanted, but there, you're always trying on stuff, or maybe you're dating someone that you thought you liked, but you find out you don't really like them, or maybe you're like living a life, but you find like that's not actually the life I want to live. I'm going to change it really quick. Again, it is this age of possibilities where we can just go left and right and bounce all over the place and try to figure stuff out because, at that time in your life, you probably feel like you have tons of time. But do we have tons of time is an ultimate question. Again, I'm keep talking about these social context factors, but again, your ability to go live out your full life or your access or your skill level or your cognitive abilities, so much of it is based upon variables such as like socioeconomic status. Again, your socioeconomic status gets you access to doors. And so like if you want to be an artist, for example, it's hard to go be an artist unless you have the means to support yourself while you're working your way out, or you got like a good contract right away and somehow you got money coming in. Again, a lot of times it takes waiting tables or being a cook to try to get where you're trying to get to. But is it easier to go out and do some things if you have the money? And that's kind of where it begins. And so depending upon like your parents' socioeconomic status, that dictates whether or not, I mean, it's like the number one predictor, not dictates, but it's the number one predictor of whether or not you will graduate college. And so again, you can see how just based upon like your parents' socioeconomic status and the schools you went to and whether or not you went to college, that's associated with the type of job that you can kind of get, for example. Okay. And so in modern times, you're starting to see where lots of people live with their parents for later, straight out of the book, since the first time in more than 130 years, adults 18 to 34 are more likely to live with their parents than with a spouse or a partner or just in their own place. 31% of parents live with with a spouse or a partner, and 32% live with their parents. Another 14% lived alone, were a single parent, or with one or more roommates, and the remaining 22 again lived in the home of a family member. So that means that half of people 18 to 34 are living with their parents or a family member, which is very significant. And you have to ask questions like what's going on, how much of that's economically enforced, and why are people living with their parents, and how is that associated with their relationships, and whether or not they're getting with significant others, and whether or not they're having babies. And so again, you can kind of look at marriage rates and divorce rates and birth rates and fertility rates, and just see that there's been some radical changes. However, there's also been other shifts because, like, women are waiting longer to have babies, for example, and going to college and having careers, and people are waiting longer to get married. And, that plays a role. And then people that are married are the ones that tend to have the most babies, for example. And people that are married are the ones that tend to have the highest socioeconomic status. So if people aren't marrying as much and they're living with their parents, how is that impacting things like their overall socioeconomic status, which is then associated with whether your life chances. Because again, your socioeconomic status dictates your life chances. And so there's just so many economic factors that you have to think about when it comes to development. Like, yes, we're in developmental psychology, so we're really focusing on the brain and things like that. But again, your experiences in the social context and your agency in the social context is associated with things like cultural variations, cultural attitudes, cultural norms. Those dictate what you can and cannot do. Um, Socioeconomic status, that's what gives you access to what you can and cannot do. So again, there's lots of sociocultural factors that we need to consider. When it comes to cognitive development for early adulthood or the emerging adulthood into adulthood, again, the book kind of breaks it down into dualism and then working your way into multiplicity and working your way into relativism. And that with dualism, again, we're evolving from that point where we're not thinking as self-centered, and our mind is definitely aware more of the social context, and we start to become more aware of everybody else, other people's attitudes, diverse opinions. And then when we come to relativism, that's when we become old wise owls. And again, I've talked a lot about this in this lecture, but again, this is the idea of like, how do we develop from like this egocentric kind of person into more like a almost communal way of thinking. And it's kind of like going from independence to communal thinking, like we're always thinking about ourselves when we're young, and then at some point do we start to think about others, and why do we care, and when do we start to invest in other people's development, for example. And so it starts to open up these doors to our cognitive development and opening ourselves up to being with other people too. When it comes to vocational development, again, when it comes to this age, we're thinking about all of our creative tasks, but we're also thinking about vocational development. And again, whether or not this is with a job, or whether this is with a skill set, or whether this is being able to go out in the woods in Alaska and being able to survive. But again, the process of defining occupational goals and launching careers. Work represents a crucial domain in life and plays an important role for all. Again, this is just one way of looking at it. Is this truly the case? Okay, like, is it all about going out and making money and all of that? Or is life about something more than that? And so, again, cultural norms. We live in America where it's all about capitalism and working 60 hours a week and never take a vacation. And, that's the Protestant ethic. That's Max Weber and the Protestant ethic, arguing that that idea of like piousness and hard work and things along those lines. That's a good essay if you guys ever get a chance to read it. Really delves into socioeconomic status, all the factors that break socioeconomic status, the consolidation of wealth in America, things along those lines. But again, we got to ask, is it really about finding the careers? But the book talks about it, okay? And so, again, our economic well being, our sense of purpose, our cognitive and social development, All of these things are geared a lot toward finding our careers. Like we are put in an education system, taught a bunch of skills, hopefully that teaches us what we need to do to go out in the world, to be able to take care of ourselves or to have our work, right? And so, but the word work itself, well, how do you actually define it? Is it like going to an office, or is it just like finding some land and being able to work on a farm? And so, again, for everyone, it's different. But it is at this point in life where we need to start thinking about this if we haven't already, because it's getting to the point where we have to be able to take care of ourselves, okay? So, the developmental task of generativity, middle-aged people may focus especially on issues of value, meaning, and purpose so they can find career pathways that allow them to mentor and guide others. Okay, so you can see how we're emerging toward that point, but again, in this phase, we're starting to really focus on ourselves. Again, that dualism, working our way into relativism, where we start to open ourselves up and we start to get there. But at this time, really focusing on ourselves, how we need, our identity, who we are, our work, right? We're trying to figure it out where it is. And so the book kind of breaks it down into development of vocational decision making in terms of the fantasy period, the tentative period, and the realistic period. Whereas, like through emerging adulthood, you're trying to figure it out what you want. And then you kind of figure it out and you're like, okay, maybe that's it. And then at some point, you make a commitment and that becomes your career. That's just, to me, it's a little bit simplistic of a way of breaking it down. Um, but again, that's one way of looking at it. And then after we get through that phase, then we get to the point where we're like, okay, let's teach others and let's start thinking about them. Okay, and we start to cognitive development to that, the next phase. The book gets into love and relationships. It breaks it down kind of by the triangular theory of love. But first, this is the idea of intimacy versus isolation. Are we able to achieve this goal? We as humans need to be connected to others. So, do we need intimate relationships? Okay, in the forms of friendships, whether it's on the workplace or internet or other people that you interact with in the life, whether it's through parents and siblings or close romantic relationships. Okay, we all need people in our life. How we find people through attraction, through liking people, proximity and exposure is always associated with things like who we marry. Are they similar to us? Um, and so, again, how we make friends is an entirely other story, right? How we make relationships is an entirely other story. But it's at this phase where it's important that we definitely develop these things. Again, it's when you go out on your own, do you have everything you need, right? And so again, what we need goes beyond work and money and finances. We also need comfort and fun and social interaction and other things that are built into us, right? And so how do we go about finding these things? Well, we go up and we say hello to people and we embarrass ourselves, and it's often quite awkward. But that's half the fun, right? Or not, because it's hard to meet people. So again, where your book put internet on the last phase, for example, it's right here. Sorry, how you make friendships. I mean, that's a new addition. In my age, you didn't have the internet to make friends. You had to like literally go outside and talk to people. And in this day and age, it's a little bit different. Dating and things is a little bit different. How we meet people is completely different. But the point is, we need these people. And so Erickson's stage of intimacy versus isolation is: are you achieving these goals? Because isolation, not being around people, is associated with enemy, right? This feeling of like normlessness or disconnect from others, which then causes psychological distress and loneliness, sadness, depression, anxiety. A lot of these things can be helped just by interacting with other people. And so it's important, maybe, I mean, again, it's biased, but the heck with it. It's in your DNA to go out and achieve these goals of finding people to be with. And so this becomes very important at this time of our life. And again, if you kind of looked at, historically when people got married or started like very intimate relationships, it's about this time. And we'll get into some marriage rates and times and things specifically. The book touches on the triangular theory of love, the idea of intimacy, passion, and commitment. And the idea is you can kind of break down all of your relationships by looking at these three words. Is it intimate? Do you share things with each other? Is it passionate? Do you have that romantic sexual love? And then is it committed? Are you guys serious about each other? And so your best friend, you're intimate and committed with, but unless you're like, interacting with them sexually, you don't have that last link in the chain. That person that you're like maybe in a serious relationship with that's, sexual. and you like them a lot and you're committed. That's, the full triangular theory of love. Your work friends, you might just be committed, but you don't really share things with them and you don't engage in sexual relations. Or they might be more than that. Maybe you have like a work wife. I have a work wife, and together we're very intimate and committed. And I like that. We went to lunch the other day. It was great. Okay. And so things that are associated with, again, whether you are attracted to people, do you like them? Are you infatuated with them? So your book breaks out fatuous love, empty love, romantic love, companionate love, consummate love. And just to break it out, like you have your crushes, your infatuous love, then you get kind of serious, then you have like I don't really like that person love. It's boring, and then you have like I'm super hot for that person and I want them all the time, romantic love. Then you have that companion knit love, which is like it's got intimacy and commitment, but it lost passion, and then the consummate love, are you guys, rocking it or not? But it's a fun idea, and it's good. It's a good idea because it does break down your friendships. And I'm not one for categorizing things, but that was pretty good categories. I do appreciate it. We all have basic attachment needs. Again, if you look at the rhesus monkey experiment, 90% of the time the monkey spends with the cloth mom that can't offer food, and then it runs over to the other wire mom, gets some food, and runs back to the cloth. We need people in our life. Babies need hugs, and that doesn't go away, right? If we don't get that, we get these anxiety related factors that come out of not having those attachment needs fulfilled. Again, we need people, which is why we're driven from our body, if we have a soul, to our basic neurochemistry to go meet people, right? So, attachment anxiety refers to the extent an adult worries about whether their partner really loves them. And your book gets into different attachment styles in relationships like secure, avoidant, and anxious, resistant, and breaks it down. Secure, they find it easy to get along with others, they're comfortable, they don't freak out too much about wanting to be abandoned or being abandoned or something like that, or some people getting close to them. Avoidant, they're uncomfortable being close to others, they don't trust people, only themselves, they get nervous when people come too close. Yeah, and then they often feel like people expect them to be more intimate than they are. Anxious, resistant, they find that they're reluctant to get as close as they would like. They worry their partner doesn't really love them or won't stay with them. They're concerned about merging with other people. This scares them away. And so, again, whether or not these categories hold up, but you can see that there's negative effects that can come from not achieving your attachment needs. And that's kind of the basic need of it is, again, we are driven over time to go seek out these types of relationships. And then the relationships are all very culturally defined, like the words we use, like friend or best friend or wife or husband or significant other. These labels, the laws that support these relationships, these are all human constructed categories. But, again, how much of our DNA, our biology drives us just to be with one person, where it also drives us to be with multiple people. And so, again, the brain has multiple pathways, four types of behavior when it comes to like sexual behavior, for example. We're quite capable of being with multiple, we're capable of being with one. And like when we have sex with someone, for example, oxytocin is released in our brain, which is that chemical that makes you feel attached to somebody. But then men also have another neurotransmitter that's released that makes them feel possessive of the person that they have sex with. Again, these are just some evolutionary psychology arguments for monogamy. And then, for polyamorousness, that's totally built into us too, to be with multiple people. The book breaks it down. What does it really take to have like a happy relationship? It does not go deep into this. It talks about things like predictors of marital harmony as good communication, no contempt, not being defensive, not stonewalling, not criticism. But again, these are just the social rules. We all learn the social rules about what it means to be friends and how to make friends with people, okay? And what happens if you don't follow the rules and you deviate? Like, you can't run around just punching people because who's going to want to be your friend? If you're just screaming and yelling and breaking things and hurting people, who's going to want to be with you? But again, these are things that humans struggle with. our ability to interact with others is not always flawless. Like if we look at things like domestic violence rates, sexual assaults against women, children, and men, there are significantly high rates of these social problems, okay? And so again, that's in us too. And so again, society does mold a lot of our behavior, a lot of that id, that inner self, right? That just, the monster inside that maybe we all have as humans. Like we're all, war happens, genocide happens. Babies are the most likely to be hurt by parents of any other age. They are twice as likely, and that's just the darkest thing ever. So again, we're not always great at interacting. A lot of that takes training. And again, that's why we've spent so much of our childhood being socialized by others, learn the rules of society so that we can get along in a predictable manner that doesn't cause complete chaos and anarchy and violence and pain. And I mean, but that again, that's this culture. If I was a Viking, would I have taught my son to go kill people in England and take their land and stuff? So again, culturally relative. So we come to development and our judging of whether somebody is successful in achieving outcomes. Again, the outcomes are all themselves cultural constructs. And so how do we predict what a good marriage is? Is there a universal, understanding of what a good friend is? Do we all have a kind of a sense about that? And that's for you to decide. But again, to get along with people, there are self-help books up the wazoo. Like how do we talk better? Conflict resolution, dealing with our problems, not screaming in front of the kids. You know what I mean? There's just so much. We could go on for days, okay? The book goes a little bit deep into the family life cycle. I'm going to post some additional videos from a marriage and family class because it would take for days to just go delve into it. But again, think about the general life cycle. What is it? You're born, you grow, you get out of school or whatever, you go out in the world, you make some friends, you get a job or you make some money, you try to find someone to have babies with or you don't because you don't want babies. You can start a family or you don't have to start a family, and then eventually we get old and die. Is that how it goes? So again, what is a family? What's the meaning of life? How should we live our life? All of it, of course, is completely arbitrary, but the book does delve into this general family life cycle of, again, figuring your stuff out, figuring out how to take care of a family, basically. Find a way to feed them and shelter them and get them through life. Find something that's meaningful and fulfilling. Try to have happy relationships. I mean, again, who is your family? Does it include your dog, your aunt, your best friends? Is it just immediate family? All of this is debated. So I'm including another lecture because this would just take me days and days and days to even further explain. And it's already been 37 minutes, and I know you guys will break down after a while, so I won't I'll look at my supplemental lectures. Okay. Single adulthood is also becoming more common in modern times. Being single is the most common lifestyle for people in their 20s. There's been an increase over the last several decades. In 1960, only like 1 in 10 had never been married, and in 2012, that's risen to 1 in 5. So you've seen some very drastic changes in our times that we're getting married, when we're having babies, whether we get married, whether we have babies, things are different. And so your book has all kinds of great graphs to show you how the age of marriage has increased from 22 to 28.7 for men, for example, 20 to 26 for women, for example. How we used to live with a spouse, 40% of people in the 60s between 18 and 24, and now we're down to 10%, which is just a huge reduction. Um, and so a lot of people are engaging in things like cohabitation instead of marriage or just waiting for a long time. And it's become more acceptable to live with people, before you get married, for example. While marriage is still a more common living arrangement for those 25 to 34, cohabitation has increased, while marriage has declined in general. However, cohabitation varies by socioeconomic status. Again, those who are married tend to have higher levels of education, higher earnings, higher earning potential. So again, I put up a supplemental lecture to go really deep into things like marriage and divorce, cohabitation, changes in the family dynamics over time, same-sex marriages, how that's created things. But again, it kind of branches off of developmental psychology way in too much into the realm of marriage and family to go super deep. But your book had some interesting discussions about this. How is culture associated with relationships, dating, and marriage? Do you marry people within your group, or is it socially acceptable to marry to somebody outside your group? It does not go deep into any of these different types of marriages, like arranged marriages or marriage and marrying for love or just eloping. Gender role changes in the family and how that has changed over time as we've moved from a traditional to more of an egalitarian lifestyle. Overall, general happiness in relationships. So all of this is a lot for this lecture, so I just added some supplemental ones to fill you guys in. So if you're really deep into the marriage and family kind of things, check those out also, okay? Regarding parenthood, again, we're having less kids in these days. We used to have 7 kids in 1900, now we're down to 2.1. People are waiting longer. Again, people are getting higher, more education, which means they're waiting till they get their careers and going through school before they're having babies, access to contraception and abortion. All right, so things change. The general experience of parenthood. Again, if we talk about this on a developmental level, how is that changing your life itself? And so it's not, it's a little bit off the realm of like the neuroscience of it all, like how is it changing the structure of your brain, but it is changing how you spend your time and what you think about and your emotions and you're just being perma-tired, that happens when you're a parent. And so how is parenthood itself actually changing you is a very long-winded question, and so I have also included some supplemental lectures on that, so I don't have to kill you guys with this lecture. But again, think about it, right? You get out of high school, you go find your job or whatever, you rock out your education, now you're like shacking up with somebody, maybe you made some kids, and here you are somewhere in your early adulthood, rocking some kids, okay? And like, what's going on in your life? How has it changed it? Has it added a whole bunch of new stress? Is it created a sense of meaning for you? Or did you not have that experience when you had kids? Like, you're always told your whole life having kids would be the greatest thing ever. But they're never like, having kids is going to be the most tiring thing you ever did. You're going to be so tired. You're never going to sleep enough. And you're not going to have any fun. And you're not going to watch a TV show for like 5 years because the second you start one, you fall asleep because you haven't slept enough. Okay? And then you got to think about things like socioeconomic status and culture. How is culture associated with parenthood? If, gender roles, how is that associated with it? What role do you play now that you've started a family? Does the traditional gender role influences of women are supposed to be homemakers associated with who does most of the housework, even though both people are working? And so, again, we have to ask a lot about the social context factors. Okay, again, how is economics associated with the welfare of your family? If your family doesn't have enough money, is that causing stress on your parents? And if your parents are stressed, how is that affecting their parenting style, for example? Your book talks about parents who experience economic hardship are more easily frustrated, depressed, and sad. And then these then affect their parenting skills. And whether or not that holds up for everybody, again, poverty has effects. And then if your kids are in social environments where they're growing up in poverty, how is that associated with their education system that they're going to, and then their overall development? And again, you can kind of see how the cycle of poverty is reproduced from generation to generation. All right. And so you got to think about other things like religion, politics, your neighborhood, school, social support. All these things are associated with how you parent. You learn from your culture the way to parent, right? And so depending upon what you were exposed to, then dictates the type of parenting styles you engage in. And so again, it's just absolutely complex. I've put up several more supplemental lectures on this in case you guys are just super deep about parenting styles and things like that. But since the last couple of lectures were like 2.5 hours and took me days to get into, I didn't want to crush you guys with it this week, so I really appreciate your time. But again, when we're thinking about emerging adulthood and early adulthood, again, it's this cycle of learning to become autonomous. Okay, how do we like live in the social world? But it's not just that, because it's also how do we live our greatest life? And so it's at this point where we have to go out and set ourselves up if we're not already set up. And we have to go out and figure out who we are and what kind of a life do I want to live? And can I achieve that life? And if I can, what are the steps I need to take to do it? And am I motivated enough to do it? Am I just, do I have the gung ho? How am I feeling? What's my emotional stance? Am I happy? How do I make myself happy? Do I need to go play golf once in a while just to bring some happiness in my life? It's also a time of skill development and really consolidating your skill levels and getting really good at stuff because your brain has grown so much. Your executive function has gotten to the ability where you can abstractly reflect and do incredibly complex things. But again, it's up to you to decide what you want, and it's up to you to decide the measure of your own life. And I don't know if that's going to hold up because, again, a lot of people, they're just told, but I'm always trying to push that. We're in college. We need to be thinking and reflecting about everything we were ever told and ask ourselves, what do we want? But again, it's when you start to enter this emerging adulthood and early adulthood, this is when you can ask that question about everything you've ever been told, whether or not you believe it, whether or not it's right for you. Like you might have been told your whole life, you're supposed to go to college and get a job. Does that bring you happiness? Is that what you want? Will that bring you happiness? Is that something you need? I mean, again, if you get a bachelor's degree, you're twice as likely, you're going to make twice as much money as someone without one, statistically. You get a master's or a PhD, you're making twice what someone with a bachelor's makes. And so again, yes, increasing your socioeconomic status through education and work and careers totally pays off in this capitalist world that we live in. But again, humans for millennia didn't have capitalism. Capitalism is a new 100, 200-year-old way of forming a society. Is that really what life's all about? What was it about for the last 10,000 years? Was it really all about money and power and consolidating wealth into the hands of the few and removing competition? And having as much materialism as we can and becoming famous? Or is life about something else? And this is that time in our life where we can go ask ourselves, what's it about? And then go seek out the answers to all of the questions. And so, again, in developmental psychology, you're not only talking about the development of the brain, your social behavior, and your emotions, your motivations, but it's also the questions, developing those questions, abstractly thinking about the universe and everything in it and the meaning of life. It's a good phase for that. So, thank you all very much and have a wonderful day.